Good evening, barflies and lounge lizards, and welcome to the Wacky World Lounge. And tonight we're going to be discussing 5 obscure sword and sorcery films. And this one's kind of a spin-off of my top sword and sorcery films series. But these are ones that I wanted to talk about, but don't necessarily have the trivia or background info I usually like to present with these. I'm going to try my best though, and here we go. And number 5 on the list is Thor the Conqueror from 1983. Directed by Tonino Ricci, who was also responsible for Cave of the Sharks, Night of the Sharks, and A Man Called Rage, Thor the Conqueror is not the Norse mythology film you may think. In fact, there is only one reference to a thunder god in the entire movie, and that was simply an ancestor of our Thor here. What we have instead is something far more akin to Lucio Fulci's Conquest. This is a primitive world, no towns or castles, and the people are quite savage. They do though have swords. And though this one came out in the sword and sorcery boom of the early 80s, I would guess that Quest for Fire was much more of an influence here than Conan was. And it tells the story of a warrior named Thor. As a baby, a rival tribe of painted up warriors kill his parents and shoot him with an arrow. A creepy wizard, who is apparently the embodiment of the god Tisha, takes the child and raises him, teaching him some very important lessons.
What's a female?
Upon reaching adulthood, and after failing his audition to join Manowar, Thor sets out on a quest, steals himself a lady, takes over a tribe, and gets some vengeance. The film stars Bruno Manetti as Thor. Manetti also starred in the aforementioned A Man Called Rage. As I said before, this is a savage world, and Thor is not much above a caveman, though he does actually live in a cave. But the brains of the operation is actually his lady, played by Melissa Longo. Longo is probably more well known to patrons of the lounge, having been in War of the Planets, Way of the Dragon, and The Invincible Barbarian. At first, Longo's character kinda hates Thor. He did kidnap her after all, but once Thor is taken prisoner, she comes in and saves the day. And she is really the standout character of the film. This one was written by Tito Carpi, and Carpi, I probably very mispronounced that, also wrote Escape from the Bronx, Warriors of the Wasteland, and Sartana's Here, Trade Your Coffin for a Pistol. He had quite the impressive resume. Now this one is light on plot and even lighter on dialogue, but it has nice atmosphere, all foggy and Conquest-like, and definitely presents some unique and oddball ideas for the genre. I had a good time with it, quite wacky. And number 4 on the list is Hundra, also from 1983. Directed by Matt Cimber, who is probably best known for The Candy Tangerine Man and Yellow Hair and the Fortress of Gold, Hundra is an Italian-American-Spanish production, and it tells the story of a tribe of Amazons who are wiped out by the Loyal Order of the Water Buffalo. All that is except for their greatest warrior, who was out of the village at the time. But Hundra returns to find her village decimated. She then sets out for some vengeance, of which she gets. And from there, she sees a wise woman who tells her she needs a baby. So after a creepy nude horse riding scene in the ocean, she heads to civilization and gets herself into all kinds of wacky adventures. And even takes the time for an etiquette training / self-defense training montage. The film stars Lorene Landon as our Amazonian Hundra. Landon is a Canadian actress who appeared in the aforementioned Yellow Hair and The Fortress of Gold, Airplane 2, and the very underrated post-apocalypse comedy America 3000. And I must say, with her Amazonian stature standing at 5'10", she was quite impressive in the role. And jumping back to the creepy horseback nude scene, originally Miss Landon was not gonna do it. A body double was brought in. But said body double was a good bit shorter than our lead and of a completely different body type. Landon saw the footage and didn't want people thinking that was her backside, so she did it herself. She also did nearly all of her own stunts, and there are plenty. I've heard it said that Hundra is more of a Red Sonja film than the actual Red Sonja film was, and for the first 45 minutes or so, I would definitely agree. It's dark, violent, and you can certainly see the Conan influence. It wears its influence well. But once she reaches civilization, there is a drastic tonal shift. It suddenly turns into a light-hearted action movie, which is okay, it works well and blends nicely, But then it kind of shifts again, and the character seems to lose her way for a wee bit. But once she gets her sword back, the Conan-esque Hundra returns and she does some slaughtering. It's also worth noting that the score for this one was done by Ennio Morricone. And number 3 on the list is The Throne of Fire, also from 1983. Directed by Franco Prosperi, who got his start working with Mario Bava, The Throne of Fire is another Italian production, as many of the great sword and sorcery movies were, and it tells the story of the son of a powerful demon who is born to a human woman. It's the child's destiny to rise up, rule the kingdom, and take the mystical Throne of Fire as his own. But in order to do so, he must kill the current king and then legitimately take his place as rightful ruler, or the magical throne will destroy him. And the only way to take the throne is to marry the princess, who just happens to be an awesomely scantily clad warrior woman. The princess, along with a brave warrior, must then team up in order to defeat the evil usurper to the throne. The film stars Pietro Torrisi, who really deserves some kind of award for his work in sword and sorcery, having been an Iron Master, the Sword of the Barbarians, of course Throne of Fire, Gunan, King of the Barbarians, and he was even Arnie's stunt double in Red Sonja. He was a great lead and even kind of looked like Wonder Bread He-Man there. Oh yeah, I went deep with that reference. And then equally as important to the film, we have Sabrina Ciani, who also has a great sword and sorcery resume, including the first Ator, Conquest, Sword of the Barbarians, and Gunan, King of the Barbarians. Ciani is easily one of my favorite genre regulars, and she wears my favorite barbarian lady costume in this film as well. Of all the films I will be talking about tonight, this is probably the one that had the least information on it. The only piece of trivia on IMDb, if you can call it that, was that Torrisi didn't shave his chest. But this is a really interesting film with a really unique style. The costumes were a strange mix of barbarian, Viking, and medieval, not to mention the villain's Prince Adam look here. It was really neat seeing all these different styles mixed together, and among all this is a big, sprawling, almost modern castle. Seeing these scantily clad barbarians run around a modern-ish castle really made me think of mixing random action figures and playsets together as a kid, which I often did. But something I did want to mention, that even though the plot is set up immediately, the film then takes about 15 minutes before it really even starts. Our lead character isn't even introduced until the 18-minute mark. But once it gets started, this is a good time and a half, and it teaches you the valuable lesson that taking up off a ladder isn't the best idea during a sword fight. And on that, we should take a break.
You've never seen anything like this before. Because this is no movie. It's live. A 20-minute sword and sorcery spectacular that puts you within inches of all of this. The Adventures of Conan, the highest-rated tour attraction ever, based on 1983 tour visitor survey. Only at Universal Studios Tour.
In the land of Muldark or the River Quell, the battle masters fought and many fell. Great armies marched against an evil power to win back the land and the ancient tower. Battle masters, the game of orcs and ogres, wolf riders and more, versus knights and archers, and the cannons roar. Command your armies, you must not fail. It's good versus evil on an epic scale. Battle masters, from the makers of Hero Quest.
And we're back with number 2 on the list, and that's Hearts and Armour from, you guessed it, 1983. Written and directed by Italian writer and director Giacomo Battiato, Hearts and Armour is a unique sword and sorcery film that, even though it came out during the Conan boom, it's far more akin to Borman's Excalibur. It's even set in the real world, loosely based on the story of the legendary knights, the 12 Peers, aka the Paladins, and it has that dark medieval sword and sorcery kind of vibe. It tells the story of a young woman who, after being set upon by a group of bandits, is rescued by a magical suit of armor that entrusts itself to her. The young woman, now a warrior, goes forth to get herself into a very complicated situation involving a group of knights, some very stylish bounty hunters, and a Moor prince and princess. The film stars Italian actress Barbara De Rossi as our magic armor-wearing lead. It doesn't appear like she did a great number of sci-fi and fantasy pictures, but she was in 1988's Vampire in Venice, as well as a TV miniseries called Frankenstein's Aunt. Next we have Tanya Roberts as the Moor Princess. Roberts, on the other hand, is probably well known to patrons of the lounge, having been in Beastmaster, Sheena, A View to a Kill, and Charlie's Angels. Then as our Moor Prince, we have Ron Moss. Moss is an American actor and musician, probably most famous for being a part of the band Player and their 1978 hit Baby Come Back. At first, I found it a bit odd that Roberts and Moss had been cast as Moors, but upon doing a bit of research, I found out that Moor is just an umbrella term used for multiple groups of people, some of which were native Europeans. And lastly, I wanted to mention that Hearts and Armour features Al Cleaver, or Cliver, in a small role. Cliver, or Cleaver, as I'm sure most of you know, was in Zombie 2, The Beyond, and the 1983 film Endgame with Laura Gemser and George Eastman. Any day that I can squeeze George Eastman into a conversation is a pretty good day. Hearts and Armour has a lot to offer. It's violent and even gory at times, has a great synthy, almost Italian zombie movie-esque score, and is really stylized and neat looking. Every knight even has their own unique helmet and armor design. Heck, one even has his own unique codpiece design. Who doesn't love a good codpiece? And though it's seemingly more grounded, being set in the real world, it's definitely full of magic. There's an awesome knight with a blowtorch hand, a scampy, magician-esque character, and just look at this guy. He can clearly see the future. Where else would he have gotten the idea for that super 90s haircut? And number 1 on the list is Deathstalker IV, Match of the Titans, from 1983. I'm just kidding, it's from 1991. But it would have been great if like every entry had been from 1983. That's kind of like the 1957 for creature features of Sword Sorcery years. Written and directed by Howard Cohen, who actually wrote the original Deathstalker, Deathstalker IV is the final film in the Deathstalker series and tells the story of an evil queen who is holding an open competition for the greatest warriors of the land. But all is not what it seems, and the queen is up to something sinister behind the scenes. And of course, our buddy Deathstalker and his new love interest end up smack dab in the middle of the competition and at the center of the queen's evil plot. And this is most definitely a worthy addition to the Deathstalker series, and arguably a better sequel to the first film than the actual sequel. Don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of Deathstalker 2, but that one feels like a totally different series almost. Whereas 4 picks up almost right where the first left off and even features the return of the original Deathstalker, Rick Hill. It even looks like the first film. Though it came out in 1991, it has that early sword and sorcery movie meets new wave of British heavy metal music video look to it. And that makes sense, being that it was written and directed by Howard Cohen, whereas Deathstalker 2 was not. It also returns to the sleazy side of the Force. As mentioned, the film stars Rick Hill, marking the first time we've had a returning Deathstalker. Hill was also in Warrior Queen and both Cyborg 2 and Class of 1999 Part 2. Then we have Maria Ford as the love interest / pretty awesome warrior herself. Ford was a model, actress, and renowned belly dancer who was in Strip to Kill 2, The Unnameable 2, and Alien Terminator. And finally, I wanted to mention Brett Baxter Clark, a buddy of Deathstalker's and the film's comic relief. Having devoted his life to training, he knows not the ways of the woman. And you may all know Clark from Bachelor Party, Malibu Express, or as one of Khan's men from Star Trek II. I also wanted to mention that there are some really spiffy cat warriors in this one, replacing the pigmen from Part 1, and uniquely, they aren't just monsters, they actually mingle with the humans. This one really is a true hidden gem of the genre. And that's all the time we have for this week. Please like, comment, subscribe, keep it wacky.